So we're going to be talking about accessibility today. So before we get into the meat of the talk, I have to present the forward-looking statement, which we all know and love. And so please don't make any purchasing decisions except based on features that are available. So before we dive into the meat of the talk, I actually just realized before the talk that there's actually there's at least two accessibility issues on this slide. One of them is really obvious. Does anyone want to guess what it might be? And you've got to shout out, because I can't hear very well. The font is very small, isn't it? I can read it just about standing up here, but I'm sure you can't. And can anyone see the second accessibility issue? Of what? Yeah, there's a little logo down here, and you can barely see it. Kind of embarrassing for a talk on accessibility, but there you go. Okay. So now on to the real talk. So what are we going to talk about? So I'm sure many of you are familiar with accessibility to some extent, but I'm going to start with a quick refresher. And then I'm going to talk about our commitment to accessibility as a company. And then I'm going to move on to discuss what we actually need from you. I've been asked for the developer community, which is to join us in this commitment to accessibility. More on that soon. So let's get going. And I want to start off with a scenario just to illustrate what accessibility is for people who might be new to it. So let's imagine a company called HeadTrail, okay? And we have two colleagues who work together at the company. I'm not sure where they got their corporate brand from. I've seen it somewhere before. I'm not quite sure where. Anyway, let's imagine it's Monday morning, and our two friends go to work, and they log in, and they see that the company is a brand new intranet portal. Looks pretty good. Here's Gary the goat. He's checking it out. Nice images. It's very attractive than what was there last week. He likes it. So let's switch over to Olivia the owl. So she logs in, and one thing I didn't mention is that Olivia is blind. So she can't see the screen. And this is what is conveyed to her when she tries to load the site in her screen reader. And a screen reader is software used by many blind people, which basically gives an audio transcription of what's on the screen. And we can see that not much is portrayed because the developers forgot that they had to provide a text alternative for all the images. So that's the easy fix. So you can see the blue little links here. So imagine they're actually invisible, they're hidden by CSS, but by simply adding those alt text links, the page can be made accessible so that Olivia, using her screen reader, can tab through the links and access the different parts of the page. So that's accessibility in a little nutshell. So a formal definition would be ensuring people with disabilities can perceive, understand, navigate, interact with, and contribute to a system. And in our business, that system is web technology. It's whatever websites, web applications we're building. And the kind of disabilities we're talking about range from motor skills through to disabilities related to sight, through hearing, speech, and cognitive issues. And today, through the talk, I'm going to be focusing mainly on disabilities related to sight, but the principles apply much more widely. So we've talked about disabilities, and fortunately, over the past few decades, a whole range of assistive technology has been developed, which has opened up technology, including websites, to people with these disabilities. And here's an example. It's actually a very cool piece of kit, if you ever get to see one. It's called a Braille keyboard. And you see the strip where the person's hand is? You can just about make out there's a row of Braille dots there, and dynamically it renders Braille that they can put their fingers over to read out the page. It's really cool. So this is another type of technology that a blind person might use to access your website or our Salesforce.com. Just a different method of accessing the website to the screen reader. So let's go back to HeadTrail. And so somebody's logged the bug. It's not accessible. And perhaps there's a slightly argumentative product manager. He's got lots of priorities. Accessibility is way, way down. and he does a back of the envelope calculation, and he says, well, I've worked it out, and this is only a tiny proportion of our user base. Do we really need to worry about these users? And I hasten to add that I don't have any colleagues like this at Salesforce. Obviously, nobody at Salesforce would do anything like this, but I'm sure there's people out there in the industry. So let's look at some statistics. Let's see if their back-of-the-envelope calculation is anything like correct. And so already, if we look at the stats from the World Health Organization for people who are blind, we're already up to 1 in 188 people of the general population. And then if we widen it more broadly to other disabilities related to sight, very quickly the numbers start increasing. So if we widen it to low vision, which is moderate or severe visual impairment, we're up to 1 in 30. If we take it further to color blindness, and this is very common, it affects approximately 1 in 12 men, 1 in 200 women. Sorry guys, we lost out in that little contest. But you can see that more and more people are being affected. And a final stat to try and convince our product manager is that as people get older, the number of disabilities they encounter tends to increase. And currently in the USA, about 1 in 7 of the population is over 65. But by 2060, that's going to go up to 1 in 4. And at the same time, a second trend is that people are tending to work later in life. So that over time, more and more of your end users are going to be older, and the likelihood of disabilities could be greater, which means if you want to future-proof your technology, you need to think about accessibility. Okay, so Mr. Product Manager there is starting to get the gist of the argument. But we can actually take it further. So this is a tool from our friends over at Microsoft. I'll give a shout out to their accessibility team. And this is an example of the kind of tool that we'll use internally in user experience at Salesforce, just to make sure that we're not just designing for people like ourselves, but we're thinking more inclusively. So if you look in the left-hand column, those are common examples of permanent disabilities. So at the top there, there's somebody who only has one arm. So obviously, he's got a permanent disability related to touch. But if we look horizontally, we see that there's these concepts of temporary disabilities and situational disabilities. So but somebody who's injured their arm has very similar issues to the guy on the left for a while until that arm heals. And then the person on the right is a new parent. And so obviously, when they're holding a baby, it's hard to do something at the same time. So when you start to think in terms of temporary and situational disabilities, you really are talking about a lot of people. So hopefully we've convinced our product manager by now. So some examples of situational disabilities. So we'll rewind about 8 hours. I don't know if there's any parents out there. Are there any parents of young children? I see one. I've met a few of the children who are being referred to there. So 8 hours ago, I'm holding my lovely boy, Sam, who's great at making fun facial expressions. He's making lots of noise. I'm trying to text my wife. The news is on the TV. And I'm benefiting from 2 assistive technologies in that moment. So the first is I like to use closed captioning on the screen so I can actually understand what's going on. And then the second thing is a well-designed web app has got large touch targets, and the links and the key calls to action are arranged on the screen so you can use them one-handed. So obviously, I wasn't the prototypical user that they were designing for, but I benefited from the good design of those technologies. And then a second example. So this is from one of our Salesforce products. That's the field service app, where we provide a system for use by people servicing, whatever, machines in the field, delivering stuff. And so here's a field service engineer. Doesn't have any disabilities, but look at his screen. His screen is broken, so that's going to make it harder to read. And he works outside in bright, glaring sunlight. And I don't know if anybody's tried to use a laptop or an iPad or a phone under bright sun. It's hard. So in that situation, he has a visual disability as well. So he's somebody else who's going to benefit from good, inclusive design. And that takes us on to the key thing I really want to talk to today. So at Salesforce, we don't just design for individuals like us. We explicitly design for everybody. So that's in general called inclusive design. And that's very in line with our core value of trust. You can see the nice medallion there on the right, equality there. I don't know if any of you were at Parker's keynote this morning, where he talked about the importance of equality. And so accessibility is a key aspect of equality. And explicitly, you can see our public commitment on our website that we're fully committed to providing accessible websites to our customers. And the thing is, though, we can only go so far. So we provide an out-of-the-box experience that we strive to make accessible. But as developers, you're building on top of that, providing extra functionality. So we actually need to partner with you, and the ask for you is that the code, the development you do, you keep it accessible as well. So towards the end of this talk, I'm going to talk about a bunch of best practices that you can employ to help us and join us in making this commitment. So we actually have a tremendous responsibility here, and this is a really key motivating factor for my team, in that by providing accessible technology, such as Salesforce, we actually provide jobs for blind people. And the unemployment rate for blind people is actually it's much, much higher than it is for sighted people. And this is a quote from one of our customers who leverages Salesforce to provide jobs for the visually impaired. So it really is a very key driver. So that's providing jobs for customers who might be blind. The other side of this is that, of course, equality starts at home. And just as an aside, so we have a whole range of Ohana groups at Salesforce which focus on different aspects of equality. And one of those is Ability Force, who push for accessibility internally. And I'm just going to hand over to Daniel, who's just going to talk for a bit about Ability Force.
So as a deaf person, I like to be very visual. So I brought up some pictures that talk about some of the many activities that we at Ability Force engage in. So first off, you may notice the logo in the center, and it's actually an American sign for partner. And we thought as an Ohana group, what a fantastic picture to represent what we do. So one of the activities that we do, such as I'm doing today, is providing and ensuring accessibility at Trailhead DX Dreamforce for attendees with disabilities. We act as what we call service support providers to the attendees at the conference. You may have seen people like me with the logo and white t-shirt at the conference, and that's one of the ways we volunteer. In the upper left, we hosted deaf and hard of hearing kids, tutoring them in tutoring them in software programming and enabling them to later on seek out careers in technology. The upper middle is one of our employees who is blind, who is demonstrating screen readers to developers and product managers. That way they can experience the product as a blind person.
And he's actually sitting in the front row over there. Hey, Adam, how you doing? You'll be delighted to hear that your picture's up here on the screen.
And then in the upper left, we had members of Ability Force with Sunday Parker, who was the vice president of the Ability Force group. And we are an affinity group for employees with disabilities where we can share best practices and our life experiences and thus be able to better achieve our work and life goals. Down here on the lower left is when we host meetings, lunch and learn for other employees. That way they can learn about disabilities and accommodation and better support us as fellow employees as well as outside in the world for people with disabilities. And last but not least, we have sites around the world. This is a picture from the launch of Ability Force in Toronto, Canada office, so that in remote locations, employees can learn about disabilities and support each other. So these are the many ways that Ability Force, what we do, and how we contribute towards equality.
All right, thanks, Daniel. And I've got to say, one of the awesome things about working at accessibility in Salesforce is that, so we have a core accessibility team. You can see some of their happy faces up there. And so we're busy working full-time on accessibility, but the entire community, many of our colleagues through Ability Force are also pushing for accessibility through the grassroots, which is very, very handy. So this is the team. I'm not going to go through them all. Are any of them here in the audience today? I can see one or two. Do you want to raise your hands? Okay, that's great. So at the end of this talk, I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of really tricky, hard technical questions which you're going to throw at me. And the people who put up their hands, they're the people who are actually I'm going to relay the questions to. So thanks for coming today. And top left there, you'll see that we have actually one of two guide dogs on the team. That's Wasabi. Mike insisted that Wasabi's photo is put up there in front of his because he claims that Wasabi is more photogenic. I'm not sure. I think they're about as photogenic as each other. But this is the team. Anyway, we're working on behalf of users out there with disabilities. So we're all busy in Salesforce, soon to be the Salesforce Tower, hoping to be on the top floor up there with a good view. But we need your help. So like I said before, we're committed to accessibility, but we can only go so far. So we work on the out-of-the-box experience. We provide an accessible platform and tools, but we need you as developers in the community to build on that and to follow accessible development techniques. And that's my key ask today. And so for the rest of the talk today, I just want to touch on some best practices that you can follow if you want to work and provide accessible UI for everybody. So there's a lot to cover here, and so there's a lot to take in. But hopefully this will give you a few interesting pointers that you can think about and bring back to your work. So number one, before any coding starts, and this is something we try and be very strict about at Salesforce, is the importance of practicing design, which is inclusive. So before any coding starts, our engineers are itching to go, but we, as an accessibility team, we review every single design before it goes out to be implemented in our core products. So I've got an example, actually, which relates back to this gentleman with the broken screen. And so this is one of the early designs of the field service app. It looks really beautiful. It's very attractive, a very good layout in many ways. But you can see that it's very white. There's a lot of pale grayish text on white. So the visual contrast here isn't fantastic. So we worked with the designer and did some iteration, and we made a couple of improvements here. And I'll flip backwards and forwards so you can see the difference. There's actually only two small things we changed. So you can see that the fonts have got bolder, and we introduced the beautiful purple bar at the top of the screen to increase contrast. And based on our testing, it made a big difference to users. So that's an example of inclusive design before any coding starts. So then the fun starts. We actually start coding. And this second best practice I like to refer to as the prime directive of accessibility. And I've developed in my time, and I kind of like this one because I'm kind of a lazy developer. If other people have done the work, I will use their work. It saves me time. And so this prime directive is reuse components. So designing accessible UI is non-trivial. So if other people have gone to the effort of doing so, then you should, be as grateful as I am. So here's an example of the interaction spec for the simple menu button, a navigation menu button. And this is only part of it. And it's very tempting as developers to, it's just a menu. I'm going to hack it up. I can do better than the component and build something. But it's actually really, really tricky. And my advice is to don't go there. Use libraries like the base Lightning components if you're Lightning developers. And the components team have made a great effort in taking the various components that make up a Salesforce UI and creating accessible interactive components out of that. So second piece of advice, use the components. And by using the components, they will enforce good practices. So if you're writing your own code, sometimes you might forget to provide some alternative text when you have a button icon. Our components actually enforce it. It's a required thing. And the same with the lightning input here at the bottom of the screen. You have to provide a label. So by using the components, it helps you do the right thing. OK, so we reused as many components as possible, but sometimes we have to write some new code. And there, the key bit of advice is to use our Lightning design system. So hands up, who's aware of the Lightning design system? Great. Great to see lots of hands. So the mission of the Lightning design system team is to make it easy to do the right thing. And that includes accessibility. So if you go to our website, and the best way to access it is via getslds.com. You'll see a whole range of our components on the left, many of which have been taken and converted into base Lightning components. And the Lightning design system provides, for every component, sample markup. And a lot of investment's gone into making sure that this markup is accessible. So if you do end up writing other components, feel free to steal the markup. Use this as a starting point, because it will get you a long way on the way towards accessibility. OK, so we've practiced inclusive design. We're reusing components. We're using the design system. What else do we need to do? So sometimes there's code that's not even in the design system. So there it's all about standards compliance. And there's two key things to keep in mind here. So the first is, when you're writing your HTML, practice good semantic HTML techniques so you have a clear structure on the screen. This relates to headings. Make sure the headings are properly nested. Only have one H1 on the screen. Make sure your tabular data is in tables. It sounds obvious, but not everyone does it. Use correct list markup, and put your paragraph text in a p tag. Again, it sounds trivial, but you'll be amazed how many people forget about it. And by doing this, you're helping make sure that your web page is going to be easy for assistive technology like screen readers or the Braille keyboard. It's going to make it easy for those to interpret, and you'll be compatible. And then the second kind of aspect of standards that you need to think about is ARIA. And is anybody familiar with ARIA? A few? So ARIA is basically an extension to HTML. But it's a bunch of extra markup that you can add to better support dynamic UI in a way which can be interpreted with screen readers. And we could easily do a 2-hour workshop just on ARIA, just to introduce ARIA. But it's definitely something to refer to and learn about if you are implementing dynamic UI. And I refer you again back to the design system. The design system has a ton of information on using ARIA and further reading examples. So back to our best practices again. Number 5 is all about keyboard accessibility. So this is the ground rule of accessibility in terms of the finished UI. If it's not accessible with the keyboard, it's a non-starter. And so there's a simple rule here. So if you can do something with the mouse, you need to be able to do it with the keyboard. So in other words, with the tab key and enter and so on. And here's an example of one of our sort of this is an extreme example of keyboard accessibility. So this is the Lightning Experience Service Console. And you can see it's an incredibly complex UI. There's a lot going on. We're really pushing the boundaries of what is possible on the web. And myself, if I was using this, I would use the mouse. I would be mousing around and jumping from window to window. So just imagine trying to use this just using the keyboard. And it was quite an engineering challenge for the team. And I'm proud to say that there's 1 or 2 bugs tucked in there, but very broadly, it is fully keyboard accessible, which is a tremendous achievement for us. And one quick snippet back to Olivia here. So Olivia's an owl. Owls like to hover in the air. This is a really bad pun. But UI shouldn't hover. There should be no hovering in the UI. So if you catch yourself designing a UI where you have some mouse over a little something and a button appears or a link appears, that's not good, because that means a whole swathe of assistive technology will never discover the existence of that link. So remember what Olivia says. Be careful. Be very careful with hover. You must provide an accessible alternative. And then last but not least, which is probably the biggest topic of all, again, we could have another workshop just on testing, but it's really, really important to test. And the earlier, of course, as developers, we all know the earlier you test in the release cycle, the better, because it's much harder to retrofit bugs later. So we really encourage you to do this as much as possible. Now, the key thing with testing for accessibility is to use multiple methods. There's different tools and techniques you can use, and none of them will pick up everything. So the trick is to triangulate using different techniques. And I'm going to touch on 4 now. OK, so the first one is easy, and it kind of relates to what we just talked about before, and that's just hands off your mouse. Stop using your mouse, unplug your mouse, whatever, put a Post-it over the mouse pad on your laptop, and just test it with the keyboard. So if you do nothing else, do this one thing, and then you're well on the way to accessibility. We talked about the importance of good HTML5 semantic markup. Having correct header, table, paragraph markup, and so on. It can be a bit fiddly, but there's a great Chrome extension called Validity. It's also available as the VNU NPM module, which you can plug into your automation. And that does a great job of just checking your markup. So integrate that into your markup, into your automation, run it regularly, helps you catch issues. Number 3, so there are also Chrome extensions dedicated to accessibility. And a really good one is called Axe. It's one we use internally. And that checks for a whole range of accessibility issues, ranging from color contrast that we haven't even talked today, through to testing your ARIA markup, all sorts of stuff. Really important to run. And again, it's available as a Chrome extension or as a module that you can hook into your automation. And then last but not least is try out your UI using a screen reader. Has anyone actually tried using a screen reader here? Quite a few. I'm really pleased to see that. And I think it's actually a workshop we should run one of these conferences. But it's the final test to see if your UI is truly accessible to blind users, and it's a really great way of building empathy with people with disabilities. Now, if you're a Mac developer, it's easy because there's a screen reader called VoiceOver that's built in, and there's a really good tutorial. You can do it in 15 minutes. It's super easy to do in a coffee break. Well worth trying. And then if you're on Windows, the screen reader we recommend is NVDA. Again, we need to do a whole workshop on this stuff because there's a lot there. But these are some of the keywords for you to look for. And then a preview for you. So I've been through a lot of testing techniques, and there's a lot to remember as a developer. And something that we're striving to do at Salesforce is to provide a better developer toolset for you to do your work. And tomorrow at 12 o'clock, I believe in the Frontier Theater, which is here. Brian, hands up, Brian. Brian over there from our team is going to be talking about a new Chrome extension that we're developing. We're beta testing it internally. And what that does is it tests your code, your Lightning Experience code, for compliance with the design system, which actually gets you a long way towards accessibility, because if you're using design system markup, you're well on the way. But it also pulls in various accessibility libraries. And so it's a tool that we're hoping to share with developers soon to make it really easy to do a lot of this testing. So 12 o'clock tomorrow, right here. Brian's a great speaker. Recommended. So there you go. 6 best practices. We touched on, there's a lot there. Hopefully there were some useful pointers there. And it all takes us back to my key ask for today is to join us in our commitment to equality, in particular to accessibility. And we provide the foundation, the platform, out of the box. If you ever find accessibility bugs in the platform, let us know, because we'll fix them. But when you're extending it and doing your customization, please take the time and to invest some time in learning about accessibility and keeping your add-ons accessible on top of our foundation. So thank you. There's a quick rundown of the best practices if you want to take a photo. And our contact details are there on the right if you have any questions or suggestions. And I think we have a few minutes for Q&A if anybody has any questions at all. if it's a tricky technical question, I will direct it to someone else in the team, possibly an intern or somebody like that. Question at the back? Is there a mic for the people asking the questions? Possibly not. I'll repeat the question. Yeah. So the question is a good question, and it's referring to the hover panel. So we have some hover panels, hover preview panels that pop up in the Lightning experience, which, yeah, it was caused a heart attack for our team when it slipped out there. So there is actually a permission to turn them off, and it's kind of buried in the help documentation. But if you do have users with disabilities, it's really important to turn off the preview panels. So if you search in the help documentation, or you can send me an email, I can send you a pointer on how to do that. Yeah. We are going to have a proper org setting to do that in a future release. Any more questions? That's all? Is everyone going to go out and try a screen reader? Brian's nodding, that's good. Oh, another question at the back? Nice and loud, please. That's another really good question. You win the Good Question Award today. Okay, so the question is, the Lightning experience, which we all know and love, kind of similar to the mobile app we saw. There's a lot of gray on white, and the color contrast isn't fantastic. So I'm pleased to say, I actually don't have a screenshot that I can show you, but we are in the process of redeveloping that UI and really improving the color contrast. So one small example of that, which I think will make a big, it's relatively small, but it'll make a big difference, is when you're looking at a record page, the data values are going to be bolder, whereas the labels are going to be finer font-wise, just to help the data pop out. But there's a whole range of improvements there that are going to be made. So yeah, we're on it. But good question. Any final questions? Going. Okay, one last question. The question is, what is the safe harbor timeline for the improved color contrast? That's another really good question. I think all I can say is that we're working on it, and we're hoping to get it out soon. I'm not sure if it's locked down for a specific release. What I will say, though, is that if you are a programmatic developer and you are building UI, you can use our design system and fiddle with the tokens yourself. It's not ideal. You have to do some work. But you can actually improve the contrast yourself. But of course, we don't want you to have to do that. We are working on it. So soon. And I know that's not an amazing answer. I'm sure there's a product manager somewhere who can give you the official answer. OK, well, thank you so much. Thank you for coming. And thank you for listening.